Greetings, travelers! Welcome to my 3 years of game dev. I hope you guys enjoyed the opening act, as it's a teaser of all the projects I have made. If any of it intrigued you, then you are in for a treat, so I plan on doing a walkthrough of each of those games' creations. But before we start, the little bunnies are experimenting on something at the moment, so they'll be joining us shortly. Now with that out of the way, let us begin with Pokemon Soul. With this one I'm really grateful for, as this project was the push I needed to start my game dev journey. The reason I started with Pokemon was because of a dream I had one day. No really, I was sleeping one day and I dreamt about a few ghost Pokemons, some floating orbs, and a swamp-like environment. Naturally, you'd be like, what the heck is all that supposed to mean? But for me, when I woke up, I understood it all. I remember grabbing my phone across my bed and began searching up Pokemon fan games. And then I found a series by Lavender titled How to Make a Pokemon Game. The rest became history. In terms of lore, I wanted the player to be a skilled tourist visiting a new island, oblivious to what's about to unfold. The island never sees the sunlight, and the ghost mons run rampant, possessing many feeble trainers. The gameplay is linear, with many interesting side quests. Oh, and it has 2 endings, the secret and true ending. This game took a year to develop, as I even made a demo halfway in, for people to playtest. I can't stress how important demos are, as in this project people were able to provide feedback on my difficulty curve and some bugs I may have missed. Another thing about this project, since I'm making a fan game, most of what I need is already done. You just gotta set up the levels, a few lines of code, and a nice story. I like to consider Pokemon Soul as dipping my toes into the water to see if this path is a worthy adversary. When I was sure it was, I decided to dive completely in, head and feet, thus starting my indie dev journey. After a few months from Pokemon Soul's release, I got my hands on the Godot engine and learned a bit of pixel art too. Heartbeast and Adam Ciana's YouTube videos helped me through this process out a ton. Thanks to the videos, I felt confident enough to tackle my first jam. So I joined the Indie Tears Jam. Theme for it was 1 room, and we only had 2 days to submit. The idea I had was creating a room that repeats, and each repeat gets very creepy. The best way to do that was to make it a little kid having a nightmare in his bedroom, and with these nightmares, logic is not there. Knowing that I only have 2 days, I planned my time accordingly for accommodating food and sleep. However, there were some issues I have stumbled upon that taught me so much for future jams. I had a vision of incorporating a bunch of different nightmare enemies, and I spent a good chunk of time designing the art for them. But little did I know, it was time not well spent. My Godot knowledge was very limited at the time, and when I implemented all the art, I was really struggling on making the code for said enemies. It drained me of so many hours trying to figure out the needed code, which ultimately drained me of my time for the audio portion. The lesson it taught me was to design the code first and see what is possible and what isn't, before dedicating a lot of time to the art. As for the time spent on that, you'd be too stubborn to let it go. I personally felt that way in this, as I felt like the intensity of the game wouldn't be the same without those fellow enemies. But what I needed to understand was the idea of not getting too attached. For the next project, we have For Their Entertainment. This is the jam submission for the N8 Jam, as the theme was Break the System. For this, you have a week to submit, and instead of going solo, I entered with a team of 3. I was the artist. This was the first time I ever worked with a team, so I was very excited to see the exponential growth of a project. With our different mindsets, we were able to produce a game where the player is a gladiator in the arena, and his goal is to break out, free prisoners, and fight through many guards. The things I learned through this experience is how making a game with a group can make the process feel a whole lot easier, but at the same time more challenging. Let me explain. As a group requires trust in everyone's role in order for the game to reach the surface. That also goes for opinions on things, as all must come to an agreement in order to move forward. Fortunately, everyone in my team did well and we didn't encounter too many disagreements, which led to our game being released to the public. However, we did kinda overscoped a bit, which is safe to say for future group projects to scope a reasonable size a solo person can make, and then work with that and polish it well. And speaking of solo scopes, within the same year as those last 2 jam games, I spent the rest of the months working on a game called Elf Before Christmas. It's a big solo project that I wanted to make, as the last solo was Pokemon Soul, and that was a lot of fun. Elf Before Christmas is a top-down action, mystery, and festive theme game. Essentially, you'll be playing as an elf who must fight through corrupted creatures, friends, and Santa before Christmas Eve arrives. This project was the heart of my game dev experience for the second year, as it helped me improve my art and coding by a ton. As for designing the universe, it wasn't an overnight thing, since I wanted the player to traverse through a harsh environment as they piece together lore to feel immersed in the land. However, I did give a brief taste of knowledge of the events prior to the player's awakening. That way, it won't be too confusing at the start, and you'll be more curious as you got more information. You know, like how food stands give out appetizers to entice nearby people to crave more? Same goes from a prologue. I also have to carefully think about level design, as I want the gameplay to be fun and provide path choices. Here I drew some sketches of my level designs before I went into Godot to design them. Ultimately, I want the player to experience the unknown and feel entertained with the discoveries and encounters. In terms of scope, I overscoped the time estimate for the release date, as I assumed a year was enough to make a full-fledged game, like how I did Pokemon Soul. But I was gravely mistaken. Best be wary of this when designing time estimates, as there could be many unknown variables taking place in between the deadline. For me, I scheduled the release of the game to be fully done by Christmas, as I started in January. Past me underestimated how difficult and time-consuming this endeavor would be, which can only be resolved through experience. Fortunately, the demo got released at the end of the deadline, and it was very, very close, as I finished it 2 days before Christmas. For the audio portion, I had to seek audio packs for the sound effects, and assistance from a musician I met during the last jam to aid me in the soundtracks. And the soundtracks he made were beautiful. This one here is for a gingerbread boss fight. I'm telling you, jam games can bridge connections with talented people, which I'm very grateful for.
We have arrived.
Hello again!
Sorry for being late, but we took care of the matter.
Oh, excellent. Welcome, welcome. You guys came just in time, as we are entering year 3, and that was when you guys got created.
That's right! The commencement of the Golden Age!
Indeed, where flowers and chaos arose.
And with that, the first game of the year is called Shadow Split, and it was a submission for the Lost Relic Jam. I worked on this project with a team of 4, as we call ourselves the Crimson Alchemy. I was the artist of the team, as we have 2 coders and 1 musician. The theme for this jam was connections, and we were tasked with a week to produce a game. The idea we planned for was an adventurer exploring an ancient ruin and discovering a relic. The relic, upon touch, splits him and his shadow apart, and both must try to reunite with one another.
So, this unification is portrayed differently throughout the game? While chronologically you attempt to unify with your shadow.
Correct. For the gameplay, the human must avoid being in the dark for too long, while the shadow has to avoid being in the light for too long. It's a nice flipping mechanics halfway through.
Something about this game feels so eerie. Like, what were those shadow hands? What is the history of this place? And why is that relic there?
So many questions, but the answers you seek are lost in history. Perhaps this adventurer is seeking the same answers you are, but who knows. Overall, this game was a lot of fun to create, as I was able to polish my top-down and UI art skills. Plus, the coders were experimenting with the light source and cutscenes for the first time, and they nailed it with the immersion. This game is a good example of designing a scope size that a solo person can do in a week. That way, as a group, we can polish it extremely well. As that game went smoothly, the next two projects, well, things got challenging. The next game we have is Crystal Locks, a submission for the 1xCM Game Jam, and the theme for it was combination. We were tasked with a week to produce a game, so I formed a team of 3. Me as the artist, 1 coder, and 1 musician. We camped with the idea of connecting colored crystals to form the needed color for the door lock.
The ideology behind a puzzle game seems like an interesting approach. But you mentioned it was quite a fatiguing experience. How so?
The game was going nicely, but communication and time management became an issue throughout some parts. Our coder had a lot of things going on, so whenever we tried to communicate with him, he would usually respond 2 hours later for each conversation we had, which is not really good for a jam time. And with certain events happening on his end, he wasn't able to focus more on coding.
Quite a predicament, but life comes first. How did you guys overcome it?
Being the musician wanted to help with the workload, so we designed together the levels for the game. I drew a bunch of levels in my sketchbook with the references of the mechanics my musician drew on the PowerPoint slides, and I showed it to him as he forged the levels in Unity. Towards the last day of submission, everyone was on call, and we decided to do an all-nighter to see this through. And because of this all-nighter, we were able to submit the project a few minutes before it was due. And though that night was tiring, it was definitely worth it at the end, cause the game came out so freaking cool.
A group's determination is enough to grasp one's desires.
For the project afterwards, I can't say it shared the same luck that the last one had. This project is called Phantasm, and it was a mini big project of a character-driven platformer. I worked on this with a friend I met on Discord, as I was the artist, level designer, and story writer, and my friend was the coder and story writer. The game was planned for Halloween, as it was about this intruder who broke into my lair the other day. Me and the Over Bunnies put him inside a simulation where he will relive his journey, but the island he visits won't be the same. This island will be more cursed, with creatures that were once human, and throughout its experience he will break down mentally, which will ideally cause him to quit thieving.
We wanted to see him fall apart and show other people to not seek this place.
Indeed. We even planned for voice acting of him starting from overly confident to very scared at the end.
Don't forget, we were gonna hear his family shame him.
Oh yeah, that too. I was going to recruit more VAs later on, once the project was in a state they can feel more confident in supporting. But when Halloween arrived, I was stressed out, as the project was extremely buggy and only 30% there. So we agreed to extend it to the end of November. I even recruited a musician to help with the workload. However, the November deadline wasn't enough, as we were having Git issues and my coder was struggling in making the game less buggy. We also had many disagreements on the story writing and player mechanics, as I argued that certain parts, like the coyote jump, were important for the player, and how the overworld jump needed tweaking. We decided to push the game to the end of December as the final deadline, but this never got reached.
What was the deciding factor to cancel this?
It was the new Pokemon game, as it was something we were both excited to play, but because of this game, we needed to focus on this too. And it took away some needed time away from me and my coder, as there was still a lot of bugs that needed to be fixed. At that point, I reached out to my musician and my VA and asked if they were okay with working on this uncertain project. One said yes, and the other said no. When I told this to my coder, we both lost motivation on the project, which led to me pulling the plug on the operation.
A tragic fate of a captivating opportunity.
I agree. The project ended due to overscoping, poor assessment on my end of the coding difficulty, and many disagreements. However, this project was far from vain, as it did teach me a ton on designing lively characters, background arts, and platformer tileset arts. But that reminds me, since we shut it down, did you two let out the intruder from the simulation?
Let out?
Were we supposed to do that?
Ah, I see. I will deal with that after then. Anywho, enough of this failed game. Let's talk about our last game, and this one's a solo endeavor I'm really excited for. This solo project is called Zalos Conquest, and is being made in Godot. Zalos Conquest is an action-packed side-scroller in a top-down perspective. Our journey would be through Zalos' eyes, as we are tasked with conquering Earth inhabitants, more especially in the Roman Empire's age. The idea behind this game is to help sharpen my skills in pixel art and coding, so when I resume Out Before Christmas, I could be at my best.
Ooh, we finally got to my favorite project, heralding my conquest.
With conquest, you need soldiers, and this game supplies, as you are able to summon robot minions to aid you in combat. Currently, only the sword bots are available for summoning. Ideally, you would be able to summon the blaster bot, the tank bot, and the bomb bot as well, once the game is finished.
I can't wait until I'll be able to see my little bomb bots. Seeing them deliver petals of destruction to my enemies would be a sight to behold.
Definitely a sight to behold, as used right can be scary. For the reasoning in the game's layout, I took inspiration from Castle Crashers' perspective, as they managed to show parallax backgrounds while still doing a top-down-ish style. I found this style to be a lot of fun, and I could get some more practice in background arts. As for the story, the game starts off in Egypt, as Zalos makes his way to the city of Rome. Essentially, you'll be up against Cleopatra and Caesar during your conquest. This is a parallel universe to our history, as Caesar never got assassinated and a few other changes happened, causing new events to unfold. This game will be entering full-time production once this video is released, as I'm very excited to work on this. With all that being said and done, this concludes my journey over the first 3 years of game dev. I hope each project mentioned here gave some type of insight on how to enhance your experience in the indie dev journey, or if it enticed you to see more of my games. All the games mentioned here are in my itch page. Well, mine is Phantasm and Zalos, of course, but the link to that is in the description. And I also post devlogs usually every 2 months or so. If interested in seeing Zalos Conquest come to life, stay tuned for that series. Happy New Year's, and we shall bid you all farewell.
Adios!
Till we meet again.